Black CEO removed from ZIP seat for a white passenger 7 minutes later. The entire staff is fired. Welcome to today's gripping tale of power, prejudice, and poetic justice. In this story, we follow Jerome Carter, a brilliant Black CEO recognized for his innovation and leadership in Silicon Valley. When Jerome boards an American Airlines flight in first class, he expects the usual courtesy extended to VIP travelers. Little does he know that a staff member's questionable actions will ignite a chain of events that not only threatens his dignity, but also exposes the ugly side of discrimination in high places. Over the course of a fateful journey, unexpected allies emerge, old rivalries resurface, and reputations hang in the balance. Before long, the entire airline staff involved in the incident faces a reckoning, and the ensuing chaos leads to consequences nobody could have anticipated. Buckle up for a suspenseful, twist-filled story where redemption and ruin collide. Before diving into the story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss the latest stories. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Jerome Carter had just wrapped up a groundbreaking meeting in Manhattan with the board members of a major tech conglomerate that was looking to invest in his rapidly growing cybersecurity firm, ShieldSight Technologies. At only 42, Jerome was already a celebrated figure in Silicon Valley, featured in Forbes and recognized as one of the most visionary leaders in the industry. So when he arrived at John F. Kennedy International Airport, heading back to San Francisco for another critical meeting, he believed it would be a simple, straightforward flight, luxurious first-class accommodations aboard American Airlines. What Jerome didn't realize was that someone had been observing him since he stepped into the airport lounge, scowling from behind a newspaper. That individual, whose press suit and polished shoes suggested a high-end corporate job, looked oddly familiar. Jerome couldn't place him right away, but the man seemed preoccupied with monitoring Jerome's every move. Jerome had always been unapologetically proud of his heritage, refusing to hide his background or his success. As a Black man at the helm of a Fortune 500 pipeline, he often faced microaggressions, the subtle glances, when he walked into boardrooms, the occasional, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" from new acquaintances. But in the rarefied air of first class, he'd learned to expect a certain baseline of professionalism and courtesy. This day, however, the simmering tension inside the lounge felt like an omen. Despite the strange undercurrent, Jerome shrugged it off. He tapped through emails on his iPhone, checking updates from the ShieldSight R&D team, who were finalizing a new encryption protocol. He noticed an urgent text from his head of HR about a delicate corporate matter, one that demanded his immediate attention once he landed. Taking a deep breath, Jerome slipped on his Bose noise-canceling headphones, letting the gentle hum of music keep his thoughts in check. He caught glimpses of flight attendants rushing around, attending to travelers, their voices echoing with the standard courtesy he was accustomed to. When his group was finally called to board, Jerome approached the gate with his first-class ticket and offered a friendly smile to the attendants scanning passes. The gate agent, Gina Maxwell, gave him a polite nod, scanning his boarding pass without a flicker of acknowledgement beyond the routine. It was only a small detail, but Jerome sensed a certain tension in her posture. Perhaps she was just exhausted from a long day. He decided not to overthink it. The man who'd been watching him in the lounge boarded just behind Jerome. Jerome still couldn't recall his name, but felt certain they'd crossed paths somewhere before. If only he'd paid closer attention, he might have discovered that the man's presence foreshadowed a confrontation that would shake the entire flight crew to its core. First class on American Airlines often offered serene comfort, plush seats, a quieter cabin, personalized service. Jerome settled into seat 2A, a coveted window seat he'd specifically selected for this journey. He leaned back, savoring the momentary calm before takeoff. Around him, fellow first-class passengers stowed their carry-ons, opened laptops, or ordered pre-flight drinks. The flight attendants offered the usual warm greetings, handing out hot towels and refreshing beverages in fine glassware. At first, everything was as it should be. The gentle hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of newspapers, the subdued conversation of frequent flyers exchanging pleasantries. Jerome was about to check a final email when he sensed someone hovering behind him. He looked up to see flight attendant Mary Caldwell, her name tag slightly askew, standing there with a concerned expression. "Mr. Carter," she said, voice clipped yet trying to maintain politeness. "I'm sorry to bother you. There seems to be an issue with your seat assignment." Jerome's eyebrows lifted in confusion. "Is there a problem, Mary?" Behind Mary stood the man from the lounge, arms folded. He had sharp features and a steely gaze. Mary took a breath. "Yes, this gentleman has a boarding pass for seat 2A. We need to relocate you to accommodate him." Jerome's pulse quickened. He had triple confirmed his seat selection when booking. There was no reason for an administrative error, especially since he'd arrived early and had a valid first-class ticket. "I'm sorry, but that can't be right. My boarding pass says seat 2A, and I confirmed it days ago." Mary glanced over at the man, who stepped forward, smoothing out the lapels of his suit jacket. "I must be seated here," he said curtly. "I'm sure we can find somewhere else for you." Jerome felt the temperature in the cabin spike. "I don't understand. I have a valid ticket for this seat. If there's a conflict, the airline usually resolves it by placing one of us in a comparable seat." Mary's forced smile wavered. "Yes, well, unfortunately, first class is fully booked. We do have a seat open in business class. Mr. Carter, we apologize for the inconvenience." At this, the flight attendants bustled around, discreetly but hurriedly. Other first-class passengers began to watch, some with confusion, some with silent disapproval, but none speaking up. Jerome held his ground. "Why am I being asked to move? I have a rightful claim to this seat. Could there be some mistake?" The man's face hardened, and with an unmistakable air of entitlement he snapped, "I'm Robert Bradley. My father sits on the board of American Airlines. If we have a conflict, I think it's obvious who should be accommodated." Suddenly, Jerome placed him. They had met at a tech conference in Chicago years ago. Robert was rumored to be an abrasive figure, always riding on powerful family connections rather than forging his own path. Jerome stared at the flight attendant, unsure how to respond to this blatant disregard for protocol. For a moment, time seemed to freeze in that narrow airplane aisle. Then Mary reached for Jerome's carry-on. "We need you to move now, Mr. Carter," she demanded, voice trembling with forced authority. "Security will come if necessary." A stunned hush fell over the cabin. Jerome felt anger rise within him. He'd faced microaggressions before, but this was direct and humiliating. "I want to speak to a supervisor," Jerome said quietly, but firmly, refusing to hand over his personal bag. The next few seconds rattled the entire first-class cabin as Mary spun on her heels, summoning her immediate supervisor, the lead flight attendant, and, eventually, the captain. In his gut, Jerome suspected something deeper was at play. His gaze met Robert's sneering expression, and Jerome realized this wasn't about a simple seat mix-up. This was about power, about who the airline staff perceived as worthy of a VIP seat, and who they felt they could push aside without consequence. What none of them knew yet was how drastically everything would backfire in a matter of minutes. Jerome, unwilling to create a scene any more than necessary, still refused to give up his seat. He calmly explained he had an important meeting to attend soon after landing, and his first-class seat was not only his right, but also crucial for the rest and privacy he needed during the cross-country flight. The lead flight attendant, Carlos Mendoza, arrived. He was a man in his mid-50s, possessing an air of seriousness that usually commanded respect. Carlos peered at the boarding passes, flipping between Jerome's digital pass on his iPhone and Robert's crumpled slip of paper. "There's clearly a duplication here," he said, eyes darting between them. "We need to see how the system assigned two people to the same seat." Robert, towering in the aisle, spoke up. "Yes, but I have special status with this airline. My father is on the board of directors, so I'm sure you can sort this out quickly. This gentleman will understand." His hand sliced through the air dismissively, as though Jerome was hardly worth addressing. Jerome inhaled, forcing composure into his voice. "I bought and confirmed this seat. I'm not moving unless there's a legitimate reason. If Robert's father is on the board, Perhaps that's all the more reason for the airline to follow proper protocol. I suggest you consult the gate staff again, or your internal system. This shouldn't be complicated. Carlos exchanged a glance with Mary and Gina. It was evident from their tense expressions that they'd either made an error or were deliberately prioritizing the demands of an influential passenger, and that influence now threatened to override fairness. An elderly passenger in 3C glanced up from his newspaper, clearly dismayed. A middle-aged couple in 1D and 1E craned their necks, whispering to each other about what was transpiring. Yet still, no one intervened. The cabin door was moments from closing, and the flight's departure was already delayed by 5 minutes. Carlos sighed, glancing at his watch. "We'll move you to business class, Mr. Carter," he said, voice rising with impatience. "We can't hold up this flight any longer." That was when Jerome found his voice echoing more firmly than he ever expected on a plane. "I've spoken with many people about similar issues of discrimination, but I never thought I'd be in this situation. You are specifically targeting me because I'm the easier passenger to bully." Jerome's words sparked murmurs throughout the first-class cabin, but it also tugged at people's sense of right and wrong. Yet Carlos set his jaw, ignoring the creeping disapproval around him. "Sir, it has nothing to do with you personally. We're just following procedure." Jerome arched an eyebrow. "Are you? Because it seems to me the only procedure here is to appease that man and disregard a legitimate, paid-for seat. I'll remove myself if you can prove that his seat was booked first or is otherwise valid. Show me the records." A hush spread through the seats. Robert flinched, looking at Carlos for backup. The flight attendant's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he pressed on. "We can't do that right now. This is an airline decision." Before Jerome could respond, 2 uniformed airport security guards appeared at the front of the cabin. The tension multiplied. Robert smirked, his gaze pinned on Jerome, as if daring him to resist. Jerome's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He knew standing his ground might get him forcibly removed, or worse, but he also knew stepping aside would mean succumbing to blatant discrimination. Adrenaline surged through him. Then, in a swift movement that caught everyone off guard, the security guards positioned themselves beside Jerome. One placed a hand on the seat back. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to come with us." Jerome's mind raced. He mentally calculated the cost of compliance loss of dignity, the message it would send to onlookers, and the nagging knowledge that this was fundamentally unfair. He envisioned the headlines: "Black CEO removed from first class for influential white passenger." He also imagined the internal conflict at Shield Site if he lost precious hours to rest or respond to urgent matters. But with everyone staring, the security guards poised, and the lead flight attendant effectively ordering him to relocate, Jerome realized he had little choice if he wanted to avoid a violent outcome. Resigned, Jerome rose from his seat. The hush in the cabin turned into shocked whispers. Robert took his seat with a triumphant smirk. Jerome discreetly reached for his phone, capturing a short video clip of the entire confrontation. As he followed the security guards out of first class, he felt a mix of anger, shame, and a searing determination that justice would be served sooner than anyone anticipated. They led Jerome not just to business class, but shockingly, all the way out of the plane and back into the jet bridge. There, another American Airlines supervisor in a navy blazer, name tag reading Denise Park, waited. Her expression was one of frazzled confusion, as if she had only half the story and none of the context. "Mr. Carter, we deeply apologize for the inconvenience," Denise began, fiddling with the clipboard in her hand. "We are trying to sort out the seat assignment mishap and will rebook you on the next available flight if necessary." Jerome exhaled slowly. The idea of waiting for a different flight was unacceptable. He needed to be in San Francisco by morning. "I insist on returning to that plane, in the seat I paid for," Jerome stated, his resolve steeled. "But more importantly, I want documentation of why I was removed. Because this is no mere mishap. I was singled out and humiliated in front of an entire cabin." Denise looked rattled, glancing at the security officers still positioned behind Jerome. One of them cleared his throat. "We should wrap this up, Miss Park. The plane is about to depart." With an air of desperation, Denise began tapping quickly on a tablet. Let me see if we can fit you into business class for this flight. It's not the seat you reserved, but it's at least close to your original fare class. You won't have to wait for a later flight. Jerome's jaw tightened. And what about that man, Robert Bradley? He demanded. Why was he given priority for my seat? And why was I the only one threatened with removal? Denise flinched. I don't have all those details, sir. The flight attendants made a call under pressure. They're the ones who see the passenger manifests. I'm only stepping in to ensure you can still travel. Please accept this compensation voucher. She held out an envelope labeled American Airlines Customer Care, presumably containing an airline credit. Jerome felt the sting of injustice more acutely than ever. But as he stared at the envelope, a flurry of contradictory thoughts swirled in his head. He needed to reach the West Coast. That was paramount. Yet every bone in his body told him this was a discrimination issue that demanded immediate redress. Accepting the business class seat and voucher felt like letting them buy his silence. Then again, if he refused, he could forfeit his critical meeting, impacting not just him, but also his entire company and staff, who were counting on him to secure new partnerships. Gazing down the length of the jet bridge, Jerome noticed 2 ground crew staff whispering among themselves, casting surreptitious glances at him. Denise's foot tapped anxiously, and one of the security guards rubbed at his neck, evidently uncomfortable with how this was unfolding. Seconds stretched, tension mounting. Jerome made a calculated decision. He accepted the envelope with a curt nod. I will take your business class seat, but I am documenting every single detail of this incident, he stated firmly. And I assure you, the public and your management will hear about this. Visibly relieved, Denise bobbed her head. Understood, Mr. Carter. Someone will escort you to your seat. She signaled to one of the ground crew, who swiftly guided Jerome back onto the aircraft. As he walked through the economy cabin toward the business section, he felt every pair of eyes land on him, whether in curiosity, pity, or confusion. The hush was deafening. In the corridor, Jerome caught a glimpse of the first-class section just ahead. Robert Bradley was already reclining in seat 2A, sipping what looked like a glass of champagne. The flight attendants milled about, pushing carts and avoiding Jerome's gaze. It was as if they were determined to pretend he didn't exist. He slipped into the business class seat, a far cry from the spacious comfort of 2A, and buckled his seatbelt. A woman across the aisle mouthed a silent apology, but he merely offered a polite, if tight, smile in return. The humiliations of the day weighed on him. Little did any of them realize that in just a few minutes, a tidal wave of consequences would overwhelm those responsible for his mistreatment. The plane finally taxied away from the gate, taking off into the gray New York sky. Jerome tried to calm his racing thoughts and focus on the tasks at hand. He had sensitive emails to review, phone calls to schedule after landing, and potential legal strategies to consider after this blatant incident of discrimination. He found it nearly impossible to concentrate. Each time he glanced at the flight attendants scurrying by, he felt a renewed rush of indignation. Every so often, he'd see heads turning from neighboring seats, peering at him with curiosity or sympathy. He considered sending a quick text to one of his confidants, perhaps Malcolm Green, the corporate lawyer who had overseen ShieldSight Technologies' last acquisition. But air traffic rules would require his phone to be in airplane mode soon. He typed out a draft text anyway. We might have a major discrimination case on our hands. Fill you in after I land. He saved it, preparing to send the moment he touched down in San Francisco. About 15 minutes into the flight, Mary Caldwell, the same flight attendant who had demanded he move, passed through the business class aisle. She paused, locked eyes with Jerome for a moment, and then averted her gaze, continuing forward as if haunted by regret or guilt. Meanwhile, the hum of conversation among the passengers around him grew. Word of the first-class debacle had spread throughout the plane. Some were outraged at the injustice. Others whispered that the big shots of the world always got their way, and it was pointless to fight back. Jerome closed his eyes, remembering how it felt to be escorted out by security for no legitimate reason. Anger simmered just below the surface, but beneath the anger lay a deeper wound. He recalled the times he'd overcome obstacles because of his skin color, forging alliances in corporate boardrooms by showcasing undeniable prowess in cybersecurity. This was a new low being, ousted in front of an entire first-class cabin, because an entitled man had status. Then, something unexpected happened. A tall man in a neat business suit stood up from a seat several rows away. He walked down the aisle toward Jerome, ignoring the seatbelt sign, and knelt beside him. "Mr. Carter?" he whispered, adjusting his gold-plated cufflinks. "I recognize you from an article in the New York Times. You're Jerome Carter from Shield Site, right?" Jerome nodded warily. "Yes, that's me." The man extended a hand. "I'm Martin Elwood, senior editor at the Wall Street Journal. I've covered some stories about diversity in tech. I saw what happened up there in first class. I'd like to talk." Jerome hesitated, reading the sincerity in Martin's eyes. "Not here," Jerome whispered back, mindful of the flight attendants. "Let's just exchange cards and talk after we land." He pulled out a Shield Site business card from his pocket. Martin slipped him his own in return. "Thank you," Martin said. "I can't promise anything, but this is a story that needs telling, if you're willing." Jerome nodded, uncertain where this would lead, but glad someone with a platform had witnessed the injustice. As Martin headed back to his seat, the slightest spark of hope glimmered within Jerome. Perhaps something good might come from this fiasco. He had no idea how quickly that spark would burst into a roaring blaze of karmic retribution, igniting a chain of events that would leave the airline staff reeling. Not long after Martin returned to his seat, the cabin lights dimmed in preparation for in-flight service. Flight attendants began distributing warm towels and menus in business class, albeit less promptly than in first class. Jerome's mind churned with ideas for responding to the ordeal. He contemplated social media, legal avenues, direct contact with the airline's executive team. His phone buzzed under the tray table, only to remind him to enable airplane mode, but it startled him nonetheless. He flicked it off, sighing. Suddenly, an argument erupted from behind him. A passenger, a wiry man in a sweater vest, was angrily pointing at Mary Caldwell. "You can't just change my meal without asking me first," he snarled. "I pre-ordered a vegetarian option." Mary stammered an apology, explaining some mix-up in the catering. Jerome couldn't help but notice her obvious anxiety. Her eyes flickered in his direction for an instant, as though the confrontation with him had shaken her confidence. She moved on quickly, but not before nearly colliding with another passenger stepping into the aisle. The tension among the cabin crew was palpable, as if the earlier drama had rattled everyone's composure. Meanwhile, at the front of the plane, Robert Bradley reappeared. He marched down the aisle, presumably looking for a restroom, but paused to glance at Jerome. Their eyes met. Robert offered a smug half-smile, his voice dripping with condescension. "Hope you're enjoying business class," he said, not loud enough for everyone to hear, but loud enough for Jerome. "Next time, maybe don't overstep." Then he continued on his way. Jerome's blood boiled. He clenched his fists under the tray table, mentally noting every face, every detail, determined to hold them accountable for this indignity. He wasn't the sort to let intimidation stand. He'd built an entire cybersecurity empire by standing up to corporate bullies and malicious hackers alike. And then, the plane hit turbulence. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, instructing everyone to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened. The aircraft jerked and shuddered, trays rattling, overhead compartments creaking. A few passengers gasped, clutching their armrests. Jerome's own heart pounded. He wasn't a nervous flyer, but the tension in the cabin, layered with the sudden lurch of the plane, was disconcerting. Mary, pushing a cart of drinks, struggled to maintain her balance. As the plane lurched again, a stack of cups toppled, clattering loudly and spilling ice water across the floor. She looked mortified, fumbling to keep the cart steady. It was at that moment that Jerome noticed a smattering of seat-belted passengers glaring at her in irritation. It seemed the entire flight was on edge. The earlier fiasco having set a sour tone no one could escape. When the turbulence subsided, Mary hastily cleaned up the spilled drinks. As she darted toward the galley, her eyes again flickered toward Jerome. As if silently acknowledging that everything had gone downhill since that moment, she and the others insisted he leave first class. Jerome offered no solace in his expression, only a stoic stare. In his mind, the wheels of justice were already turning. If only Mary and the rest of the staff knew just how dire the consequences would be, and how soon. 30 minutes into the flight, dinner service began. Jerome accepted his meal politely, though he barely touched it. His appetite was overshadowed by the swirl of thoughts about retribution, fairness, and the humiliating public spectacle he'd endured. With a sigh, he pulled out his iPad and began jotting down notes. He detailed the sequence of events, including names and approximate times, ensuring he'd have a coherent record later. Across the aisle, hushed conversation drew his attention. An older woman with silver hair and a floral scarf was speaking softly to the passenger beside her. She was recounting how she'd seen that gentleman, Jerome, get kicked out of first class, and how shocking she found it. Even from a distance, Jerome could sense her disapproval toward the crew's conduct. It served as a small reminder that he wasn't alone in this. People were witnessing the injustice. Then, in what seemed like a bizarre twist, the plane's intercom chimed, and Captain Lawrence Michaels spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to make an unscheduled landing in Chicago O'Hare due to a technical issue. There's no immediate cause for alarm, but we must follow protocol." A ripple of confusion swept through the cabin. The flight attendants exchanged anxious glances. Making an unscheduled stop meant potential chaos, missed connections, angry passengers, complicated logistics. But for Jerome, it offered an unexpected opportunity. Chicago was Robert Bradley's old stomping ground, where Robert's father had some of his corporate offices. If the plane landed there and the fiasco was made public, the local press might have a field day. Jerome's mind raced, already envisioning how this detour could work to his advantage. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, tension among the passengers escalated. Several demanded answers from the crew. Mary did her best to soothe them, but her already rattled demeanor made her responses shaky and unconvincing. Robert Bradley was nowhere to be seen. Presumably, he'd retreated to first class, unconcerned about the plebeian matters of flight diversions. Jerome eyed the lead flight attendant, Carlos Mendoza, bustling through the cabin, clearly rattled by the situation. In that chaotic moment, a manager from the cockpit area stepped out. A tall woman in her 40s, with a crisp posture and a name tag that read Sarah Knight, in-flight supervisor. She carried a certain air of authority that Mary, Gina, and Carlos lacked. Sarah quickly conferred with the flight attendants in hushed tones, presumably about how to handle the unscheduled landing. But when her gaze fell upon Jerome, there was a flicker of recognition. Whether Sarah knew about his forced removal from first class or not, Jerome couldn't tell. But there was something in her eyes, a quiet determination, perhaps a sense of responsibility. She nodded once at him, then disappeared back toward the cockpit. The seatbelt sign illuminated, and the final descent into Chicago began. Outside the window, Jerome could see the twinkling lights of the city below. The unexpected turn left him with a jolt of adrenaline. Could this disruption lead to a confrontation with the airline's higher-ups? Would Robert's father intervene? The possibilities churned in Jerome's mind as the landing gear engaged with a heavy thud. When the wheels finally screeched onto the runway, the intercom crackled once more. "We've arrived at O'Hare International Airport," the captain announced. "Please remain seated and await further instructions from the cabin crew." The entire plane fell into a watchful hush, as if bracing for the next wave of surprises. Little did they know, the next few minutes would unleash a dramatic sequence that no one least of all the flight attendants could have ever foreseen. As soon as the plane rolled to a halt on the tarmac, a flurry of activity began. Ground staff and technicians approached, performing checks on the aircraft. The seatbelt sign was switched off, and passengers were informed that they could step into the terminal while maintenance took place. Mixed reactions fluttered through the cabin. Some people complained bitterly about delays, while others simply grabbed laptops and phones. Resigned to waiting, Jerome unbuckled, stood, and retrieved his carry-on from the overhead compartment. He noticed Robert Bradley step out from first class, an irritated scowl twisting his features. Their gazes locked momentarily, but Robert quickly glanced away. Meanwhile, the lead flight attendant, Carlos, made a rapid announcement. Those who wish to disembark and wait in the terminal, please do so quickly. We will update you on our departure time as soon as possible. Jerome, spotting the in-flight supervisor Sarah Knight near the cockpit door, decided this might be his chance. With measured steps, he approached her. "Excuse me, Miss Knight," he said. "I'm Jerome Carter. I'd like to speak to you about an incident that happened earlier in this flight." Sarah hesitated, scanning the bustle of disembarking passengers. "I'm aware, Mr. Carter," she replied quietly. "I was informed of the seat dispute and your forced removal. Please understand, I've only just come on duty for the second half of this route. I haven't gotten the full story yet." Jerome explained concisely, highlighting how he'd been discriminated against and humiliated in front of the entire cabin. Sarah's face grew increasingly troubled as he outlined the details. When he finished, she drew a breath. "This is serious. Let's move into the jet bridge, where we can speak privately." They exited the plane, stepping onto the jet bridge. Distantly, Jerome could see Robert speaking on his cell phone, likely complaining to his family or business associates about the inconvenience of an unscheduled stop. A handful of other passengers milled around, and the hustle of airport staff echoed throughout the concourse. Sarah turned to Jerome, her voice subdued. "I'm sorry you experienced that. There is a clear protocol for resolving seat disputes, and from what you've described, it sounds like that protocol was disregarded. I'll need statements from the crew, but please understand I don't have the authority to remedy this fully on my own." Jerome nodded. He could sense sincerity in her. "I appreciate your honesty, but I want this addressed, and I want it addressed properly. I'm sure you're aware that I have resources to ensure this issue doesn't get swept under the rug." Sarah swallowed, nodding gravely. "I understand. Let me see what I can do right now." She gestured for Jerome to wait while she stepped away, pulling out a phone to contact the airline's management desk. Jerome watched her intently, noticing her tense posture as she held a murmured conversation with someone on the other end. Her nods and terse replies hinted that this was escalating faster than she expected. A moment later, Sarah returned, her eyes flicking around anxiously. "Mr. Carter, I've just been informed that American Airlines Executive Relations team wants to handle this immediately. They're sending representatives to speak with everyone involved." Jerome raised an eyebrow, stunned at how quickly word had reached the higher-ups. Perhaps Robert Bradley had already started complaining to the board, ironically alerting them to the fiasco. "Fine," he replied, stepping aside as a wave of disembarking passengers passed, eager to stretch their legs. "I'll speak with them." Sarah nodded, but before she could say more, a uniformed airline official approached at a brisk pace. His name tag read, Thomas Price Operations Manager. Thomas greeted Sarah tersely, then turned to Jerome, a formal smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Carter, I understand there's been a serious issue. We'd like to invite you to one of our VIP lounges to discuss this matter in private." Jerome felt a thrill of vindication at the mention of the VIP lounge, ironically now being offered after he'd been tossed from a first-class seat. With a level stare, he said, "Lead the way." Thomas and Sarah guided Jerome into the bustling concourse, weaving through travelers and heading toward an elevator marked authorized personnel only. As the elevator doors closed, Jerome suspected something monumental was about to unfold, something that would reverberate far beyond this flight. And he had only to wait a few more minutes to see how drastically the staff who wronged him would pay for their choices. The elevator delivered them into a private corridor leading to a secure conference room that appeared well appointed for high-stakes meetings. The walls were adorned with framed photos of American Airlines' storied history, featuring everything from vintage propeller aircraft to the latest Dreamliner. Thomas Price swept open the door, inviting Jerome in. Inside, two more individuals waited, a stern-faced woman in a dark suit and a middle-aged man wearing an ID badge that read Corporate Counsel. The woman in the suit stepped forward first, extending her hand. "Mr. Carter, I'm Linda Howell, Vice President of Customer Experience. I understand you've had a distressing incident on Flight 2793. I'd like to sincerely apologize on behalf of American Airlines." Jerome shook her hand, nodding politely but not mincing words. "I'm expecting more than an apology. I was openly discriminated against in front of a plane full of people and forcibly removed from my seat. Linda drew in a breath. Yes, I've been briefed that the seat should never have been taken from you. We take this very seriously. Our policies are clear. If there's a seat conflict, the crew must verify the validity of both tickets before making any changes. Additionally, we do not prioritize a passenger simply because of their connections, race, or any other factor. What happened seems to be a gross violation of our protocols. The man with the ID badge, who introduced himself as Jonathan Leach from Corporate Counsel, stepped forward. Mr. Carter, we'd like to gather a statement from you about the incident. We will also need to speak with the flight attendants involved and, of course, Mr. Bradley. If you have any evidence, such as video or witness statements, we'd appreciate you sharing it. Jerome immediately thought of the short video he captured during his removal. He also recalled Martin Elwood, the journalist from the Wall Street Journal, who had witnessed a significant portion of the event. Jerome decided to keep Martin's involvement discreet for now. Instead, he pulled out his phone, enabling airplane mode to turn off so he could show them the clip. I have a short video of the confrontation, he said, recorded just before I was forced to leave. I'd also like to note there were many witnesses, including passengers in first and business class, who can corroborate my account. As the video played, Linda Howell's face paled. The camera clearly showed Mary Caldwell demanding Jerome vacate his seat, with Robert Bradley looming in the background, smirking. The audio, though slightly muffled, captured the crucial line. My father sits on the board of American Airlines. It was enough evidence to reveal the staff's blatant willingness to cater to a white passenger's whims over a paid black CIP. After the video ended, silence reigned for a beat. Linda exhaled slowly, and Jonathan's brow furrowed. Thomas Price cleared his throat. This is very incriminating, he admitted quietly. Our policy is absolutely not to remove a first-class passenger in favor of another for personal reasons. Discrimination is unacceptable. Jerome's voice was calm but resolute. I expect swift accountability. I trust you'll ensure it. Linda nodded gravely, glancing at Thomas and Jonathan. They exchanged subtle nods, some silent agreement forming between them. We have no choice but to take immediate action, Linda said, her posture rigid with determination. Mr. Carter, please give us a few minutes to contact our HR and operational leads. We'd like to propose a resolution to you before you continue your journey. Jerome folded his arms across his chest. I'll listen, he said. But make no mistake, I will not be silenced by a mere voucher or shallow apology. The staff involved and anyone who influenced their decision needs to be held accountable. And I need a seat on the next flight to San Francisco, first class. Linda waved Sarah Knight and Thomas Price closer, issuing rapid-fire instructions under her breath. Jonathan Leach stepped aside to call the airline's legal department. Jerome took a seat at the polished conference table, crossing his legs, a subtle surge of satisfaction running through him. This was how it should have been handled from the start, no cowering to nepotism or prejudice. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Barely 7 minutes had passed since he stepped off the plane and into this lounge. The speed of the corporate response was staggering. When Thomas Price returned, he cleared his throat. We've spoken with our leadership. Given the evidence, the staff members in question, Mary Caldwell, Gina Maxwell, and Carlos Mendoza, will be officially relieved of duty pending further investigation, effective immediately. They won't return to the plane. Jerome blinked in surprise. He had expected an internal review, some drawn-out process, but it sounded like the airline was skipping straight to decisive action. And what about Robert Bradley? Jerome asked. Linda's eyes flickered with concern. We can't control passenger behavior in the same way we control our employees, but we can certainly file an incident report against him. He may face consequences if any harassment or policy violations are proven on his part. Plus, if his father truly is on our board, we'll have to see how that intersects with the broader corporate policies. Jonathan rejoined them, slipping his phone into his blazer pocket. Mr. Carter, we intend to offer you a formal apology, a full refund of your fare, plus complimentary first-class travel for the next year. This is not to buy your silence, but to acknowledge the gravity of this mistake. Jerome felt the swirl of emotions: anger, relief, vindication, suspicion. He was aware that the airline's swift reaction might be partly driven by fear of a potential lawsuit and negative publicity. Yet he appreciated that, for once, the system seemed to be responding to blatant injustice. "I'll consider your offer," he said with measured politeness. "In the meantime, I need to get to San Francisco by tomorrow morning." Linda nodded briskly. "We've rebooked you on a direct flight leaving in 2 hours, also first class. We'll have an agent escort you personally to that flight, ensuring you're on board without any issues." Jerome studied their faces. He saw genuine concern and the weight of corporate responsibility overshadowing them. "I accept those arrangements," he finally said. "But know this, if you try to downplay or bury this, I will pursue every legal avenue, and I won't hesitate to speak to the press." Thomas offered a tight smile. "Understood, sir." And with that, the axe had fallen on the staff who had orchestrated his humiliating removal. In less than 7 minutes, their careers within American Airlines were effectively over. But the drama wasn't finished. Robert Bradley was still out there, fuming that his power play had collapsed. What came next would escalate this entire affair into an even more astonishing turn of events, with ramifications reaching across corporate boardrooms and social media feeds alike. When Jerome emerged from the conference room, an airline representative guided him down a side hallway that led to a private lounge area. There, he was offered refreshments and told to relax until his new flight was ready for boarding. As he settled into a plush armchair, his mind still buzzed with the whirlwind of events. He pulled out his phone to find a flurry of notifications. Missed calls, texts, and emails vied for his attention. The most pressing messages came from his team at ShieldSight Technologies. Worried about his delayed arrival, Jerome quickly explained the situation. Though he glossed over the ugly details of the first-class altercation, he'd have to provide a thorough account later. Moments after hitting send, another notification pinged. An email from Malcolm Green, his personal attorney. The subject line read, "Heard a rumor." Intrigued, Jerome opened it. Malcolm's message was short and to the point. "I've received an anonymous tip that you were involved in a flight incident. If you need legal backing or want to make a statement, call me." A cold shiver ran down Jerome's spine. News had traveled fast, which likely meant that Robert Bradley or someone else on the flight was stirring the pot. Or perhaps the airline's swift action had triggered internal leaks. Jerome shot back a quick response. "I'm handling it. We'll update soon." Just as he sent the message, a silhouette appeared at the entrance to the lounge. It was Mary Caldwell, the flight attendant who had first confronted him about relinquishing his seat. Her uniform jacket hung awkwardly, and her name tag was gone. She looked visibly shaken, eyes rimmed with red, her posture slumped. An airline security officer stood beside her, as if escorting her out. Mary caught Jerome's eye and paused, as though she wanted to speak, but the security officer gently nudged her along. She mouthed a word, "Sorry, maybe." Jerome felt an unexpected pang of empathy. He didn't know her story or what had driven her to side with Robert Bradley so swiftly. But her regret didn't erase the harm done. As she disappeared down the corridor, Jerome exhaled, tension deflating from his shoulders. The airline had kept its word about relieving her of duty. Perhaps for Mary, losing her job was karmic justice, or maybe a harsh lesson. A few minutes later, Linda Howell reappeared, a folder of paperwork tucked under her arm. "Mr. Carter, I'd like to finalize the official apology and get your signature on a few documents, ensuring you're compensated as agreed." She guided him to a small conference nook in the lounge, offering a pen. The documents outlined American Airlines' apology, the compensation terms, first-class travel for a year, plus a settlement figure that left Jerome blinking. They were taking no chances with a lawsuit. Jerome skimmed the legalese carefully. The agreement didn't include a gag order. It merely stated that the airline was formally admitting fault and offering restitution. Satisfied, he signed. Linda thanked him, then hesitated. "If you don't mind, Mr. Carter, we'd appreciate if you'd allow us to address the situation publicly on our social media platforms." "It's standard practice," to mitigate any rumors that spread from flight incidents. Jerome angled his head. As long as you're honest about what happened, I have no objections. He knew the airline wanted to get ahead of any negative publicity, especially if Robert Bradley tried to spin the story in his favor. For once, being transparent might actually serve everyone's best interests. Linda's phone buzzed, and she took a call. Stepping aside, Jerome caught snippets. Yes, he's here. We've resolved it. Staff have been dismissed. Robert Bradley is demanding. And then she walked farther away, her voice fading. A wry smile tugged at Jerome's lips. So Robert was indeed making demands, possibly calling in favors from his father or other board members. But the airline's top brass had already seen the video evidence. Not even the richest nepotist on the board could easily overturn such a blatant wrongdoing. Just then, a beep on the lounge's speaker system announced boarding for the rescheduled flight to San Francisco. Jerome gathered his belongings, tossing back a final gulp of water. As he exited the lounge, a flurry of movement near Gate 2 caught his eye. Robert Bradley stood in heated conversation with a group of airline staff, presumably waiting for the same flight. Jerome felt a surge of unease. Would they be stuck together for another 5 hours? But to Jerome's surprise, Robert's boarding pass was rescanned, and a gate agent shook her head firmly. Robert's voice rose, carrying across the concourse. This is absurd. You can't just bump me off the flight because of some made-up policy violation. The gate agent, flanked by an airline security guard, responded quietly but firmly. Moments later, Robert's face twisted in rage as they escorted him away, parted from the cluster of passengers trickling onto the aircraft. Jerome paused, stunned. It appeared the airline had deemed Robert a disruptive passenger, or decided his presence posed a liability. Once again, the staff involved were showing that the old rules had changed power and nepotism no longer held absolute sway. Robert glanced around, his eyes falling on Jerome in a venomous glare. Jerome met his gaze with calm resolve. In less than an hour, everything had turned upside down. The plane's staff was fired, and Robert Bradley was the one exiled from the flight. Jerome boarded with a mixture of relief and triumph swirling in his chest, settling into his new first-class seat, ironically too. Again he exhaled, letting the tension of the day dissipate. The redemption was almost sweet, but a part of him wondered if more trouble awaited him once he landed. As the cabin door sealed and the safety demonstration began, he told himself that for the moment, the crisis was contained. Little did he know, the final act of karmic retribution still lay ahead, waiting to unleash its full force at 35,000 feet. Flying above the twinkling night lights of the Midwest, Jerome tried to decompress. This new flight crew was attentive, if slightly over-accommodating. One attendant recognized him from a previous business trip and offered a sincere apology on behalf of the airline. The seat next to him remained empty, no chance of another seat dispute this time. The cabin lights dimmed, and he decided to check the internet connection. American Airlines offered limited Wi-Fi at cruising altitude, enough to handle messaging and emails. Sure enough, his phone buzzed with new notifications as soon as he logged on. Among them was a text from Martin Elwood, the journalist he'd met earlier on the previous plane. I got bumped to this new flight too, thanks to the fiasco, Martin wrote. I'm a few rows behind you in business. Let's talk after landing. This story is big. Jerome typed a quick reply. Let's do it. I have plenty to say. He felt a bit of exhilaration, imagining how a well-placed article could spark a broader conversation about airline discrimination and nepotism. Yet he also knew such articles could draw negative publicity toward his company, if not handled carefully. He made a mental note to coordinate with his PR manager. Another notification arrived. This one, from an unknown number, read, Enjoy your flight. This isn't over, RB. Jerome's stomach twisted. Robert Bradley was apparently not one to accept defeat gracefully. Jerome turned off the phone's ringer, deciding he'd deal with it later. He reclined his seat, letting the hum of the aircraft lull him. As he drifted into a light doze, he recalled the countless hours he'd spent building Shield Sight, nights hunched over code, days forging strategic partnerships. He'd championed diversity, hiring bright minds from underserved communities, aiming to show the tech world that talent transcended race or background. Today's incident was a stark reminder of how far society still needed to go. A gentle nudge stirred him from his thoughts. An attendant placed a cup of coffee on his tray table. Jerome thanked her, taking a sip of the warm brew. It was smooth, calming. The tension in his body began to ease. For the first time since that dreadful confrontation in Seat 2A, he felt the faintest sense of peace. Then, a commotion erupted 3 rows behind him, in business class. A high-pitched voice rang out. "I don't care who you are. You can't just hijack the phone line." Jerome craned his neck to see a passenger aggressively leaning over the seat in front of him, glaring at a flight attendant. The attendant seemed flustered, trying to calm the passenger down. Several heads turned, but the exact details were unclear. Before Jerome could even process what was happening, the overhead speakers crackled. "Is there a Mr. Jerome Carter on board? Mr. Jerome Carter, please make your way to the front galley. The captain requests your presence." A jolt of anxiety shot through him. Being summoned by the captain mid-flight was never a casual affair. Had something else gone wrong? With his heart pounding, Jerome unbuckled and stepped into the aisle, heading to the galley near the cockpit. There, Captain Roger Westfall stood, arms folded across his chest, a grave look on his face. Beside him was a flight attendant who held a small slip of paper. Captain Westfall leaned in. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry to disturb you, but ground control alerted us that you received a threatening message. We confirmed it originated from someone claiming to be Robert Bradley." Jerome's eyes widened. "Yes, I got a text. But how did ground control?" The captain cut him off. "He apparently made calls to the airline's main line, threatening you and the airline if we didn't treat him fairly. The staff at O'Hare passed it along to us. We take these matters seriously." A worried furrow etched his brow. "We've notified the authorities, and local law enforcement plans to meet you at the gate when we land in San Francisco, just to ensure your safety." Jerome's stomach twisted. Robert's vendetta had escalated into open threats. This was far from over indeed. Captain Westfall patted Jerome's shoulder. "We'll make sure you have a secure exit and can deplane safely. Sit tight for the rest of the flight, and let us handle this." Jerome nodded mutely, returning to his seat. So much for relaxation. His mind churned with possible scenarios. Would Robert or his father attempt some legal retaliation? Could Shieldside be targeted? His phone beeped again with a new text. "You made a fool of me. You'll regret this." It was from the same unknown number. Jerome set the phone to airplane mode for good measure, deciding he wanted no further interruptions. By the time the aircraft started descending into San Francisco International Airport, the tension in the cabin felt suffocating. Jerome's mind wrestled with a mix of relief at nearing home and dread about what awaited him at the gate. An airline representative had already promised security personnel would escort him away from any potential danger. The wheels finally touched down with a jarring thud, the plane rolling to the gate. In that moment, Jerome recalled the swirling events of the past several hours. Forcibly removed from first class, confronted with blatant discrimination, and then, within minutes, seeing those responsible lose their jobs. Now Robert Bradley had unleashed a vendetta. The story had more twists than a Hollywood thriller. As the seatbelt sign clicked off, Jerome took a deep breath. No matter what awaited him, he resolved to remain calm, principled, and unyielding. If Robert wanted a fight, he'd discover that Jerome Carter wasn't a man to be intimidated. After all, he'd built his entire career on standing up to bullies and adversity. What neither of them knew was that the final measure of karmic balance was about to land squarely in Robert's lap, and it would be bigger than either man could have predicted. The airplane door opened to reveal a small delegation of San Francisco police officers and airline representatives, waiting with grave expressions. Before any of the other passengers could disembark, a flight attendant guided Jerome toward the jet bridge, where the officers introduced themselves. "Detective Alvarez, SFPD. Are you Mr. Carter?" Jerome nodded. "That's me." The detective explained that Robert Bradley's threats, combined with a formal complaint filed by American Airlines regarding his harassment, triggered an immediate investigation. "We're here to ensure your safety," Detective Alvarez said. "We'd like to ask you some questions about the messages you received." Jerome pulled out his phone, showing them the menacing texts. The detective's eyes narrowed as he read them. "All right, we're definitely dealing with something serious. Do you know if Robert Bradley is here in San Francisco?" Jerome shrugged. Last I saw, he was barred from boarding the plane. He might still be in Chicago or traveling elsewhere, but I wouldn't put it past him to show up anywhere. Behind them, the stream of disembarking passengers began, many casting curious glances at the unusual presence of law enforcement. Martin Elwood, the Wall Street Journal editor, stopped short when he spotted the officers talking to Jerome. He mouthed, "You okay?" Jerome gave a subtle nod, and Martin continued on, presumably to gather his bags. One of the airline representatives stepped forward, a woman in a crisp uniform, whose name tag read Helena Vasquez. "Mr. Carter, please come with me to the Admirals Club Lounge. We've arranged for you to collect your luggage and have a secure exit. We'll also have staff assist you with any ground transportation." Jerome followed her, flanked by the officers. As they navigated the terminal, overhead announcements buzzed, and passengers bustled around. The everyday airport chaos contrasted starkly with the seriousness of his personal drama. He caught glimpses of himself in reflective surfaces, tall, well-dressed, flanked by law enforcement, and felt a surreal sense of displacement. Had it really only been hours since he left Manhattan? Upon reaching the lounge, Jerome found a quiet corner, the officers and airline staff forming a protective circle. Detective Alvarez asked for more details, typing notes into a handheld device. Jerome recounted everything, from the moment Robert demanded his seat, the staff's compliance, their subsequent firing, and Robert's ominous texts and calls. The detective nodded grimly. "All right," Alvarez said, "we have enough to file a restraining order if you want to pursue that. We'll also notify relevant departments about Robert Bradley's threats in case he tries something here. I'd advise you to be cautious." Jerome sighed. "Thank you, detective. I appreciate your help." Helena Vasquez returned with 2 suitcases and towed Jerome's luggage. "Here you are, Mr. Carter. We've arranged a private car service if you'd like. It's waiting outside Terminal 2. Jerome nodded gratefully. "That'd be great. I need to get to my office, then home. It's been a long day." A swirl of emotions tugged at him. Exhaustion, frustration, triumph, and lingering apprehension about Robert's vendetta. He made his way through a back corridor, avoiding the main throngs of travelers. At the exit, a black Lincoln Town car with tinted windows idled, the driver stepping out to open the door. Detective Alvarez shook Jerome's hand. "We'll be in touch," the detective said. "Keep us updated if you hear from Bradley again, or if anything else unusual happens." Jerome slid into the car's spacious back seat. As they pulled away from the curb, he glanced at the receding airport. The ordeal felt like a fever dream. He closed his eyes, letting the hum of the engine lull him. Soon he'd be at Shield Site's headquarters, where urgent matters awaited. The severity of the day's events weighed on him, yet he couldn't help but feel a sense of karmic justice for the flight attendants who had blatantly disrespected him now fired, and for Robert, whose father's influence hadn't saved him from disgrace. He arrived at his company's front gates, the building looming with its modern steel and glass facade. Jeremiah Bates, one of his trusted executive assistants, hurried outside, eyes brimming with concern. "We've been trying to keep the lid on this, sir," Jeremiah murmured as he guided Jerome through the lobby. "Some media outlets got wind, but I've deflected most inquiries. Are you all right?" Jerome gave a brief nod. "I'm fine, but it's complicated. I'll debrief you soon. For now, let's keep everything internal." They stepped into the elevator, ascending to the executive floor. On the ride up, Jerome couldn't help remembering how swiftly events had unfolded. From that moment in seat 2A to the staff's abrupt termination, and now the looming threat from a powerful family. Everything had changed in a blink. But he also reflected on the bigger picture, how a single blatant act of discrimination had triggered an unstoppable chain of karmic retribution, exposing the rod of nepotism and unleashing a wave of accountability he had rarely seen. On some level, it felt good to know the airline had responded decisively. He just hoped the next few days wouldn't bring more chaos. He walked into his office, a sleek space overlooking the bay. His personal assistant, Tanya, had set a stack of files on his desk documents, needing his immediate review. He let out a tired chuckle. Life went on, even in the midst of scandals. Checking the time, he realized it had been less than 24 hours since he boarded that first plane at JFK. It already felt like a lifetime. Yet, in the back of his mind, a quiet alarm kept ringing. Robert Bradley. The man was humiliated and furious. apparently willing to threaten violence. Jerome resolved to remain vigilant. But for now, he immersed himself in work, letting the routine of reading reports and signing documents soothe his rattled nerves. Little did he know, the final blow of karmic balance would soon land in Robert's lap, changing the narrative once and for all. In the days that followed, news of the incident trickled into the media. At first, it appeared in discreet blog posts and smaller tech publications. Black Tech CEO removed from first class to accommodate white passenger. Then, a local station in Chicago ran a brief segment featuring an anonymous source who claimed to have witnessed the entire debacle. By the end of the week, major outlets like CNN and MSNBC picked it up, generating a national conversation about airline discrimination. American Airlines released an official statement, acknowledging an unfortunate error involving a first-class seat dispute and confirming the termination of several staff members who violated company protocols. They expressed their commitment to fairness and equality for all passengers. As a result, the airline's phone lines were flooded with calls from customers demanding clarity, some threatening boycotts. Social media brimmed with hashtags like #AirlineAccountability and #StandWithJerome. Jerome found himself swamped with interview requests. He was determined not to let the coverage become a spectacle, balancing his right to speak out with concerns about ShieldSight's reputation. With the counsel of his attorney, Malcolm Green, and the advice of his PR manager, Simone Jang, he decided to give one comprehensive interview to Martin Elwood of the Wall Street Journal, the man who had witnessed much of the event firsthand. The interview took place in ShieldSight's glass-walled boardroom. Martin arrived with a cameraman, set up a discreet recording station, and asked questions that ranged from the sequence of events on the plane to broader issues about racial bias in corporate America. Jerome responded candidly, determined to highlight both the humiliating incident and the importance of broader systemic changes. Meanwhile, rumors swirled about the Bradley family's response. Robert's father, Edward Bradley, was rumored to be livid over the public relations disaster. Even though he held influence in American Airlines, he reportedly couldn't shield his son from the avalanche of negative press. In fact, some industry insiders whispered that Edward Bradley had been quietly pressured to step away from his board position, at least temporarily, to pacify outraged stakeholders. Then, in an abrupt twist of fate, Robert Bradley tried to strike back. He filed a frivolous lawsuit against Jerome, claiming defamation and emotional distress, insisting that Jerome had orchestrated the seat dispute to tarnish the Bradley name. The media had a field day dissecting the absurdity of the claim. Lawyers, talk show hosts, and civil rights advocates all weighed in, most dismissing Robert's action as a desperate ploy. Jerome's legal team swiftly countered, presenting the airline's official statement and the video evidence. A judge wasted no time in throwing out the lawsuit, citing a lack of merit and warning Robert about potential sanctions for abusing the court system. The public backlash was swift and brutal. Social media erupted in fresh condemnation of the Bradley family, mocking Robert's failed attempt to paint himself as a victim. For Jerome, watching Robert's downfall was both surreal and somewhat sobering. He had faced injustice countless times in his life, but rarely had he seen such quick, decisive comeuppance. It was as though the universe had decided to make an example of Robert and the complicit airline staff. Indeed, karmic retribution seemed complete. Yet Jerome remained cautious. He knew powerful men often had resources for a comeback, but as he read the news about the Bradleys' board seat under review, and as major outlets championed his stance on corporate discrimination, he realized a significant milestone had been achieved. Not only had he personally won vindication, but he'd also helped expose a culture of deference to privilege and prejudice in a high-profile industry. The ramifications, he suspected, would ripple far beyond American Airlines. Standing by the window in his corner office one afternoon, Jerome pondered how drastically a single flight could alter the course of public discourse. From being unceremoniously ousted from a first-class seat to catalyzing a national conversation on airline ethics, the entire journey felt like a testament to resilience and a warning to those who misuse power. A faint smile crept onto his face as he recalled the final scene. Robert Bradley, barred from boarding, raging in the gate area, while Jerome embarked on his rightful first-class flight. That memory alone was enough to confirm what he'd always believed. Do the right thing, stand your ground, and watch how justice, often in the most unexpected form, will eventually prevail. Thank you for joining this riveting journey of Jerome Carter's stand against discrimination. From the tense confrontation in a first-class cabin to the swift downfall of those who misused their power, this story reminds us all that justice can strike when we least expect it. Jerome's unwavering resolve not only reclaimed his dignity, but also ignited a national conversation on how deeply prejudice can run, even in spaces that promise elite comfort and status. If you found inspiration in Jerome's triumph and you're eager for more captivating tales of truth and retribution, please remember to give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to our channel. By supporting this platform, you help amplify stories that expose wrongdoings and champion the courage to confront them. Thank you for watching.